Silver B metal coating application. We're going to apply some Silver B metal coating to a decorative plaster piece. Now this is a dry plaster piece we're going to paint, so it's not going to need much in the way of surface prep, but our brush is. We're going to use a cheap 1-inch chip brush, and the first thing we'll need to do is just make sure there's no loose hairs in our chip brush that might come out as we're painting. And then I'm going to don some latex gloves. Now the metal coatings are non-toxic, so you don't have to wear gloves, but it's a good idea for general cleanup purposes to put on a pair of nitrile or latex gloves. Now keep in mind that the metal coatings do contain real metal powders and they will settle out over time, so make sure you shake that up really good before you start using your metal coating. Make sure that's suspended in the metal coating mixture. Now it just takes a small amount of the metal coating to get the effect that we want. So we're just going to apply a light coat of the Silver B all over our plaster piece. Now since I'm applying this by brush and with a cheap brush at that, what I'm going to do is just apply an even coat of the Silver B all over the plaster surface. And then I'm going to go back and stipple on the surface, stipple out all the brush marks. Now a word about the plaster we're working over here. This is a hydrocal piece that I'm painting, and you could also do this with any porous gypsum like pottery plaster, hydrocal, hydrostone. Any of those will work well with the metal coatings. Just keep in mind they must be dry. You don't want to try this while a piece is still damp, or the paint will not absorb into the surface and may peel off easily later. So it's a good idea anytime you're working with a plaster material like this, give it a few days to dry, and if it's a damp climate where you're working, it's a good idea to let it dry out in front of a space heater first to really get a good dry plaster surface to work with. Again, if you don't do that step, if it's not completely dry, you may have issues with the paint peeling off later because it didn't really bond into the pores of the plaster. Now what I want to do with this first coat is just apply it all over the surface, make sure everything's covered, and then I'm going to go back and stipple out those brush strokes. Now this serves a couple of functions. As I mentioned before, this makes sure that we get all the brush strokes out, but it also gives us a nice kind of hammered metal look to it. And you'll find that as the metal coating dries, it lays down a little bit so that you don't have as aggressive a texture as you might think you would doing this all over the surface. We'll actually wind up with a fairly smooth surface there. Now the other thing we're trying to do here is work that metal coating down into those deep recesses, some of those detailed areas where we might have a little bit of metal coating that needs to be worked down into a little air bubble or a little crevice there on the surface. We want to make sure that's all pushed into that surface very well so those air bubbles don't pop later on and reveal white plaster underneath. Now I typically always apply 2 coatings. It's a good idea to put down a base coat and then come back with at least one more coating. Even if you're not doing a patina, it's always a good idea to apply 2 layers of the metal coating. Now our first layer is dry and we're ready for a second layer. And keep in mind the dry time of the metal coatings, since it is a water-based product, is dependent on the humidity level where you're working. If you're in a warm, dry environment, it's going to dry very fast, possibly in just an hour or so. If you're in a cool, damp environment, it's going to take a lot longer. So as soon as it's dry to the touch, you're ready for that second coating of metal coating. And again, it's always a good idea to shake it first, make sure that that metal powder is suspended, and that'll get the most vibrant look out of that metal coating. Now again here we want to apply the metal coating all over the surface of our piece and then come back and stipple out the brush strokes. Now as a side note, we can also use a roller or a sponge brush. There's a number of application techniques. Since this is a water-based material, there's no brush that's going to disintegrate on contact with this. It's a very easy product to use. So keep in mind you can use a number of different applicators. Ron uses a sea sponge a lot to come back for the second coat to get a more natural look. So keep that in mind. A sponge works well. Even a piece of torn synthetic sponge will get a nice effect. Now again, on our second coat, we're working that down into those little crevices, and that's very important there because if you don't brush that in and really work it down to those deep areas, when the metal coating dries, you might wind up with some voids there in your paint. Now, once that's applied all over the surface and stippled out, we're going to let this dry for several hours. Our next step, after our metal coating has thoroughly dried, is to apply a top coat or a clear coat. Here we're using Clear Guard. Clear Guard has an excellent UV and corrosion resistance, so we're applying 2 coats of the Clear Guard over the top of our metal coating. Now it's critical that you do these next steps in this order. We're going to apply a couple of coats of the Clear Guard all over the piece, letting it dry about an hour in between coats. And then again, we're going to let that dry for a couple of hours. Now the step after that will be to apply some wax to bring out the contrast. Now we could leave this as a standalone effect. This could be a finished piece right here with just our metal coating applied over just 2 coats applied and a clear coat. But we really want to bring out the contrast of the piece and give it more of an antique cast pewter look. So what we're going to do is go in with some of the black wax and just apply a light coat of the black wax all over the surface. And if you want, just depending on the piece you're working on, you can apply it just locally in specific areas that you want to bring out the contrast. This has a lot of deep texture and a lot of places I really wanted to accent, so I just give it a nice even coat all over the surface. And these Sculpt Nouveau waxes, keep in mind they go through a couple of different stages as they're curing. They go through a drying stage and a curing stage. So what we want to do here is right after the wax starts to dry, just after about 15 minutes or so. You don't want to wait much longer than about 10 or 15 minutes to come back with a soft towel and pull off the wax on any of the high points. And we want the remainder of the wax to stay in those low areas. Now, what I said earlier about the order of things here, it's very important that we put our clear coat down. Our Clear Guard needs to go on first and then our wax. Once we put the wax on, we're done. We can't apply anything else. So always make sure before anything else that you put down your Clear Guard. And now we have our finished effect that will resemble antique pewter or antique silver.